Welcome back to Voices of the Regenerative Decade here on One Earth Live. I'd like to welcome our next guest, Osprey Orielle Lake. Osprey is the founder and executive director of the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network International, or otherwise known as WECAN, working nationally and internationally with grassroots and frontline women leaders, policymakers, and diverse coalitions to build women's leadership, climate justice, resilient communities, and a just transition to a decentralized, democratized, clean energy future. Osprey founded the International Women's Earth and Climate Summit, which brought together 100 global women leaders to draft and implement a women's climate action agenda. And she is the author of the award-winning book, Uprisings for the Earth, Reconnecting Culture with Nature. So welcome, Osprey. It's wonderful to have you with us today here on Voices of the Regenerative Decade.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. So, Osprey, I'd love you to just introduce yourself and your work and just let us know what you've been up to in the kind of like environmental solutions and regenerative movement.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I'm the founder of the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network. And it's interesting because this is how I really got involved with our work around regenerating the Earth's ecosystems and fighting for climate justice and ensuring that frontline communities are represented is, about a decade ago, I really started seeing that there was an important nexus between women and climate solutions. And it was like really an untold story that needed to be visibilized. And a lot of work has been done since then. And there's many, many different women's groups doing this work. But I think, we've actually gained some momentum. But in a nutshell, the work is around really demonstrating that we actually cannot get to sustainability. We cannot come into harmony with each other and the earth. We cannot have the kind of future that we want unless we really lift up women's leadership, and to understand that due to gender inequality and institutionalized patriarchy, and I would add racism and colonization and our economic system, we really need to lift up and hear the voices of women at this time more than ever before.
Thanks, Osprey. I'm wondering if you could highlight a little bit around your work that was done with the Women's Climate Action Agenda, and just maybe tell us a little bit of a backstory around how that came about.
Yeah, sure. It's actually really interesting. In 2009, when the Obama administration came in to office, I think there was a lot of hope that during the UN climate talks that happen every year, there was going to be this really powerful outcome by governments. And actually in Copenhagen, where the meeting was held, it was another failure of governments to act in speed and scale to the climate crisis. And I had been doing a lot of artwork. I used to do sculpture work, and I still write, but I really had my aha moment when I was walking in the redwoods and realized what kind of crisis we were in. And that's when I started the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, and realized after a lot of research that we were really missing women's voices, and brought together 100 women leaders from around the world, both very well-known women like Vandana Shiva and Jane Goodall and many others, with grassroots indigenous women, and seeing like we really need to come together as a women's circle. This is our great power, and that we do things differently. And that it was essential to realize that the roots of patriarchy, the roots of capitalism, the roots of colonization, the roots of racism are all connected in this dominator worldview, and that has to be disrupted. And so from that came the formulation of this Women's Climate Action Agenda, which really puts forward in many spheres of many different categories, a way that women are approaching these problems in a unique way. And I'll just segue to say for a moment that on our website, we have something called Women Speak, which is an ongoing storytelling database with literally now thousands of stories that you can go, so you can read about women or hear about directly their stories of their climate struggles and their climate solutions, and now also the COVID-19 pandemic. So there's just a plethora of information around women's leadership, and really demonstrating both statistically, but also in terms of actual narrative, why we need to center women's voices and what kind of agenda we're carrying.
Wonderful. Well, I guess that's a good point to kind of segue across or continue the conversation. I would love to find out, Osprey, why do you think that women's voices are so necessary within this movement? You know, what is the role of women emotionally and spiritually right now as part of this regenerative or movement, or finding our place again in right relationship with the planet? I'm just curious from what is it about that bringing that feminine essence back in, I guess in a time and an era that has been very patriarchal, that is necessary at this time?
Well, I think for this conversation, I want to sort of dive into the spiritual and emotional component, but I also want viewers to know that, I also really want to honor the mental and intellectual and legal and economic work that women have done at a very academic level as well as an advocacy level, and their power in those spaces. So that needs to be respected because often that's overlooked. But something that I think is one of our powers right now that we need to really generate and to uplift is that our emotional and spiritual voices are often devalued, and it's too soft for some of these political discourses on what we need to do in government, what we need to do in our advocacy work. And just to give a very short story, I'm very honored to be a co-director of the Indigenous Women's Divestment Delegations, which the founder of the Divest, Invest, Protect movement is Michelle Cook, who's a Dene, very powerful Dene woman, human rights attorney. And through these delegations, we have gone to various banks, bringing Indigenous women who are on the front lines of a lot of these fights, like the Dakota Access Pipeline, to directly meet with financial institutions and bankers and to demand justice and accountability for Indigenous rights to protection of their territories, and to get them to stop funding fossil fuel companies and demanding banks divest, or different asset managers or insurers. And in addition to all the legal information we bring to them, I think one of the most important things is for these bankers to have direct contact with women sharing their stories about how they're being impacted, and that it's not right that their water's being harmed or their children are being harmed, and also to share their spiritual knowledge of what a different relationship with nature can be. And a lot of times it is those stories and that spiritual and emotional energy that cracks open a space that is different. And I think one of the reasons, whether we're at the climate talks advocating, or in these divestment movements advocating, or in many different spaces, I feel like one of the reasons the emotional and spiritual information is devalued is because it's exactly what changes the landscape. It's exactly what changes the conversation to a different kind of feeling and knowing that allows us to be more human, to connect more with each other, with the earth. And it's something that I think women are quite skilled at. It's not that men can't do it. It's that women have been silenced for actually millennium due to the patriarchy in this great value that we have to offer in changing the narrative, whether you want to call it the feminine principle or whatever we want to title it. Our voices need to be unsilenced, and that incredible wisdom and spiritual identity that we have needs to be uplifted. And I think that's part of the solution that we need right now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Osprey. Well, I would love to hear your reflections on the current great pause that we are in. And some say that it actually offers us a great opportunity to change business as usual, or how we're going about living on the planet. What things look like on the other side of this, we don't know. I'm wondering, what do you think is some of the opportunities that are present right now with this current pandemic, how it stopped business as usual, and how we could potentially emerge on the other side in a different way?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I have several layers of responses. The first is, before I share some of the positive things that I think can come about this, I want to acknowledge, that we do work with frontline communities. And I'm aware that there are a lot of people hurting right now, people without homes, people without food, people without water. We work in communities where people are like telling them, please wash your hands. And they're like, we don't have any water. We don't have any soap, or wear a mask. Like, where do these masks come from? And people have lost loved ones. So, I just want to acknowledge the grief and the difficulty and challenge many are having, and that those of us who are more privileged, to me, have a responsibility to reach out even more right now. So that's like the first layer of responses. We need to help those in need and who are more vulnerable communities, Indigenous people, people of color, just these frontline communities need our support in the Amazon and around the world. The other component and another layer to this is, we are on pause. And so it's a very unique moment where we can see that there's a crack in the systems and business as usual, as you said. So how do we emerge from this different? We cannot go back to where we were because where we were wasn't working. And a lot of times we hear like, we're all in this together now. And I would say, well, we're not all in this together exactly. It's uneven. There's an injustice in this moment as well. And so this is an opportunity for us to call for accountability and justice and to really call out these economic systems that are not working, these different systems of how we're treating Mother Earth. I mean, this may be our one big opportunity to transform the systems. And so that part I think is quite exciting. I know just for me personally, I do have, my work does cause me to travel to the UN climate talks, to the communities where we work, to be in direct actions on the street. And I have had time to grow food at my home for the first time in a long time, have had time to have a lot more internal reflection. Yes, I want to be different on the other side. It's also about us being different kinds of human beings. There's a lot of things that are confronting about my lifestyle that I'm now addressing. We're learning how to work online so that we can not travel so much when we come out of this. But I think that, it's a moment where we also need to realize that not everyone has been involved in these systems at the same level. As an example, we work with a lot of Indigenous peoples, and I think it's time to really listen to their voices. They have been screaming at the top of their lungs that we need to live in harmony with Mother Earth. 80% of all the biodiversity left on Earth is in Indigenous lands and territories, and it's because of the way Indigenous people have lived in respect for their sacred lands and for the water and the air and the forest. So I would also just like to highlight that as we move through this phase, that we pay attention to voices that need to be centered. And to me, Indigenous voices and leadership and Indigenous rights is a key component of what we need to be focusing on as we move through this phase, as well as mentioned, lifting up women's leadership and really understanding the role of those voices that have been silenced and why we need to bring them into the conversation and center them at this time.
Thanks, Osprey. Very valid points. And, it does feel like there are different levels of privilege, without a doubt, and entitlement, depending on our situation right now within this pause. So I appreciate you highlighting that and the importance of being aware of that and how we choose to speak, take action and operate during these times to make sure that everybody is included. Yeah, it's extremely important for us to be aware of that, I feel. So thank you. I do have a question for you. You started to touch on what it is to kind of make changes in your own life or be aware of your own impact. And, I'm wondering, how can our viewers be a part of solutions, Planetary Solutions, or the regenerative movement in their own lives? What changes can they make to, I guess, come back into right relationship with the earth from your perspective, just, for someone to be able to make those changes individually?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that people are experiencing to different degrees is, what's happening to our food security, what is happening to our food systems. And I can't tell you how many colleagues and I have, as mentioned, have started our own gardens, like dig up the front yard and start growing our own food. And really seeing how in our globalized structure and the way our economic system is based on endless economic growth has led to our food shed and so many of the things that we quote unquote need being traveling all over the world to bring us, all these different foods or different products that we may or may not need. And I think a lot of the message is about getting localized, and what people can do is to, maybe they want to start gardening. I think it's also important to know where our water comes from, where our energy comes from. We're real advocates of decentralized and democratized energy systems. what an amazing time to figure out, how to collect with your neighbors in your community around bringing in renewable energy to your community. We're also working a lot on the banking system. There's something called public banking that a lot of folks don't know about, which really moves money into your community. And I would just suggest people look up what public banking is. And I'm here in the San Francisco Bay Area where we are now actually working on bringing public banking to this area. And everything from how the money flows in and out of your community, how food is moving in and out of your community, how water is moving in and out of your community. I think these are all things people can tangibly get a hold of, get educated about more, and get involved in, because clearly Mother Earth has sent us to our rooms, as some people have said, to think about what we have done. And while we're in our rooms, I think we need to look at our neighbors and our community and get so much more localized than we've ever been, and decrease our footprint, our carbon footprint, but also really learn to mobilize more locally and to see, the needs of our direct community. And the last thing I'll say, since we had been talking about Indigenous peoples, is I also think it's really important to learn about the Indigenous people in your community and realize their leadership and their knowledge, their traditional ecological knowledge, and their knowledge of the landscape, their deep knowledge of how to live in balance with the ecosystems that we're all a part of. So I would also suggest really learning about Indigenous peoples in the lands where you live, and uplifting their leadership and the efforts that they are involved in to bring healing to our communities and the earth.
Thanks, Osprey. From your perspective, what do you think are some of the most important issues of our time that need to be focused upon for us to really change the way that the world is going when it comes to the regenerative movement or planetary solutions? Is there any particular issues or topics that you see need like a bit of a focal point or a spotlight put on them for us to be able to achieve regeneration or change in the next 10, 20 years?
Yeah, I'm just going to mention a few beyond the ones I've already mentioned. One, I think we've got to protect our forests. And at WeCan, we have a Women for Forest program that involves both reforestation, but protecting old growth forests. I think forests are key. We also do a lot of work around getting the financial institutions to divest from fossil fuels. I think we need to realize that there's no way we're going to move our way out of the climate crisis or stop future pandemics unless we really change our relationship to nature and our relationship to our energy systems. So we do a lot of work around divestment, but also reinvesting in clean and renewable energy. And then the last one I'll mention for now is around rights of nature. Right now, most of our legal systems all over the earth that are part of the dominant culture, not everyone, but the dominant culture, is viewing nature as property. And this is a modern notion that we have dominion over nature, and a worldview that we have dominion over nature. And this has led to the terrible fracture that we're in right now. And like, how do we actually not, in addition to cultural change with nature and becoming more in communion in a balanced way with Mother Earth, how do we actually get our legal systems to give rights to nature? As an example, how do we ensure that waterways, forests, our climate, as viewed equal to human rights? Because right now, in the ownership model, nature is sort of like our servant and slave, and the nature is a subset of the economy, when it should be totally reversed, where everything should be based on respecting the natural laws of the earth. So I've been working for quite some time now on something called Earth Jurisprudence, which is these new rights of nature laws. And I work in a coalition called the Global Alliance for Rights of Nature. And we work around the world to educate people and actually put into place laws in communities so that we can stop fracking and stop a lot of bad practices, and really bring attention to the fact that we must live within the rules and laws of Mother Earth. And I think right now Mother Earth is clearly telling us that we have stepped out of line, that we are overreaching into wild habitat, which is part of the reason we have this global pandemic. Why we have the climate crisis is that we are not respecting Mother Earth's natural laws and the sacred systems of life. And so it's a whole body of work, but just to say we have actually won cases on the ground, it's not theoretical. And in 2008, Ecuador put rights of nature into their constitution, so it's also held at a national level. So it's just something I would encourage people to learn more about, is rights of nature work.
On that topic as well, Osprey, would you mind giving some examples of some of the places around the world and the actual natural features that have actually obtained the rights of nature? And I know that there is some rivers and mountains and other. I'm wondering if you could just share with us any of those that you know of, so we're aware of those.
Yes. Well, one that I really love is in New Zealand, where the Wanganui River has been given rights. And I was really fortunate to be able to go and meet with some of the Maori people who are involved in obtaining those rights. And they have a saying there that I really love, which is, "I am the river and the river is me." And they view the river as not metaphorically, but actually their ancestor, that they come from the river. And so the river has personhood, and it's a form of rights of nature. It's slightly different than how we describe it in terms of legal constructs, but it's in the same body of work of viewing nature as a rights-bearing entity. And so the Wanganui River has rights. That was a really powerful case. And there's different cases across the United States in local communities where people have been able to have what's called community rights, where the community has a right to say what is happening to their community in terms of the local environment and ecological features. And this is really important because we've not had a way to trump corporate law in the States. And so we need to realize we have to assert these rights. They're not going to be given. And we need a way for communities to be able to protect the places that they live from, corporations coming in and building factory farms or fracking or what have you. And so I find it really exciting work, because as you were mentioning, we want to come out of this time with different models of how to live. And I think this is a really promising model that many folks have been working on. It's not like we have to come up with this from scratch. We've been actually practicing this for quite some time.
Thanks, Osprey. I feel it's a very important topic to raise, so thank you. We're coming to the end of our time together, so I would love if you just wanted to share anything more about your work and how people can find out more about what you're up to and how they can get involved, and any last thoughts you may have around this topic to share.
Thank you so much. People can go to our website at www.wecan, W-E-C-A-N, and then the whole word international spelled out, wecaninternational.org. And there's a couple of things. There's a series of webinars that we're putting on frequently now that people can engage in on a variety of topics, from Indigenous rights, women for forests. We're about to do a webinar at the end of this month on new economic structures, because we know we cannot continue in this endless economic growth model. So we're meeting with women leaders from around the world on this topic. So I would encourage people to get engaged through our webinar series. We are doing a lot of work with the Stop the Money Pipeline campaign around divestment issues that folks can get involved in. So that is around, getting money out of the fossil fuel sector. We do have work on rights of nature that folks can get involved in, and all of these things on our website. So there's a lot of ways for folks to sign up for our newsletter and interact with these different campaigns and educational opportunities. And I think the most important thing is that we're in this together. I think people need to know that we're not alone. We might be in our shelter-in-home spaces, but I really want people to know that, WeCan is here for you. We and many other organizations know that more than ever, we need to work in solidarity right now, and to use this pause time to collect, to unify, to be in solidarity, and for folks to not feel alone.
Thank you so much, Osprey. And where can people find out about your work? What is your website?
It's www.wecan, which is WeCan, and then the word international spelled out .org, wecaninternational.org.
Fabulous. Well, it's been wonderful speaking to you today. Thank you so much for your participation and Voices of the Regenerative Decade for One Earth Live. You've been listening to Osprey Orielle Lake, and I'm Becca Dakini, your host. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in the next session.